G'day mate, 40 here. So excited after the election. For the first time, we have 2 black women in the United States Senate. I mean, pretty amazing stuff. So those are all in on identity politics, right? They're offended when there's identity politics that runs in the opposite direction. So a lot of women are incredibly excited for a woman president and for girl power. Now talking about how offended they were by Trump's bro campaign. The election results were pretty much what I predicted. And they're pretty much what the Mar-a-Lago, Susie Wiles, Chris LaCivita campaign had said they would be for the past year. And for 2 months on Mark Halperin's show, he's been saying that Mar-a-Lago feels confident of a Trump victory. That Kamala can't touch Trump in the battleground states. And they were right. The biggest journalistic revelation of this election is how superior Mark Halperin is to the entire rest of the news media, right? If you were following Mark Halperin's show, you would have heard for 2 months that an increasing number of Republican political operatives were absolutely assured that Donald Trump was going to win. Right, you got all sorts of insights from Mark Halperin's show you didn't get elsewhere. Right, the analysis and the reporting that Mark Halperin has unveiled regularly on his two-way conversations, like, it's just superior to everything else in the news media. Everything from Axios to Politico, especially the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, the Associated Press, NBC, CNN, ABC, CBS News. Right, what Mark Halperin had to offer was better than every other news outlet combined. Every other outlet combined. So my prediction this week was that by 6:30 p.m. on the West Coast, we'd know the results of the election. And that's pretty much accurate. By 6:30 p.m. on the West Coast, the New York Times Needle, which ran about 2 hours behind Polymarket, said there was a 66% chance of a Trump victory, and he was leading in many of the swing states. So by 6:30 p.m., it was clear that Donald Trump was going to win, and the needle ticked steadily upward through the 70s to through the 80s, and then to over 95%. I believe Fox News was the first one to call the election. It appears that Donald Trump's going to win all 7 swing states, which is something that Mark Halperin has been talking about, that Mar-a-Lago felt pretty confident that they were going to win all 7 swing states. James Blair, the Trump political director, felt confident that Trump was going to win all 7 swing states. We're going to have a comfortable Republican majority in the U.S. Senate. And it appears that the Republicans will hold the House of Representatives as well. So the Republicans will hold all 3 branches of government. And they'll be far more united and cohesive and effective and efficient this time around, because Donald Trump now exercises far more power over the Republican Party than he did in 2016. So the 2016 election looked a lot like an accident. You could explain it as an accident. So one thing about being postmodern is you accept there's no one narrative that is sufficient for explaining life. And you could explain the 2016 election as an accident. That doesn't mean it was the only way to understand the election. But if James Comey had come out to say he was reopening the investigation of Hillary Clinton, then you could make a case that Donald Trump's 2016 victory was an accident. But this current victory is not an accident. He's going to win, it appears, the popular vote. First time a Republican has done that since 2004. He's going to have an electoral college landslide. So I'm speaking to you from Westwood, California, outside the University of California at Los Angeles, 5 miles east of the Pacific Ocean in Santa Monica. So in each of Trump's 3 campaigns, his percentage of the white vote has dropped. So you'd think that would be kind of weird for such a white supremacist candidate. Of course, Trump was never a white supremacist. That was a media canard. And the media became particularly one-sided in the final week of the campaign. The New York Times became particularly one-sided. They kept running at the top of their webpage for the previous week, what's at stake? And David Sanger, their chief foreign policy correspondent, said what's at stake is having a foreign policy that Trump would just operate on whim. And Trump would not abide by any of the norms of American foreign policy. So that's a bad thing. American foreign policy has overall, since the Cold War, been a disaster. And so a normal person would think not following the norms of disastrous foreign policy would be a fantastic development. The New York Times read hardly any critical articles about Kamala Harris in the final week of the campaign. She was just objectively a terrible candidate. Just terrible. And then all the overheated rhetoric about Trump being a white supremacist, a fascist, and an authoritarian is particularly ludicrous. And I don't think it hurt Trump, right? There's absolutely no evidence that Tony Hinchcliffe, the insult comic, set Trump back among Puerto Rican voters and Latino voters. And this is probably the number one story in the news media over the past 10 days was the remarks of an insult comic, right? Given 20 times the amount of attention that Joe Biden's comments calling Trump supporters garbage received. So an insult comic, right? An insult comic works within a particular genre. And Tony Hinchcliffe, right? It took 10 days for his votes to finally land, his jokes to finally land. So many great comments on Twitter. This is the revenge of Peanut the squirrel. Okay. Thanks for the tip to watch Mark Halperin. Can I solve world hunger? No. People are going to have to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. So it's about 65 degrees here in California. Yeah, the entire weight of the mainstream media was foiled by Donald Trump. The media was just particularly egregiously one-sided and biased and highly selective and intentionally distorting of things that Donald Trump said or that was said at a Trump rally. Right? You have to treat the remarks of an insult comic differently than you treat the remarks of a candidate. Right? They're different characters. You don't treat them the same way. Judas says, please unban my main account. Judas, you've been reminded so many times to watch your language and behavior. And so it's up to you, man. You gotta maintain a civil tongue. Come to the chat with the peace, love, and understanding attitude, the ethos of this channel. Dan Turrentine has been a wonderful addition to Mark Halperin's show. He's the Democratic strategist, but incredibly fair. Like, it shows empathy for Trump supporters, for Republicans. He is fair to the best of his ability with regard to Democrats and their shortcomings. He is such a giant step up from that smarmy guy, Tim, who was incredibly one-sided and unfair in his analyses. So I think Dan Turrentine, the Democrat at Mark Halperin show, is 10 times better than Tim. A complete side note here. I've never been particularly obsessed or concerned about AI, and I just saw on Twitter some of the main brains behind AI noting that innovation and development in AI has slowed considerably in the past few months. So AI right now seems to remind me largely of the predictive words that Gmail will suggest you when you answer an email. Wall Street is booming, right? The prospects for an American economic resurgence are booming after this Trump victory. What happened in America? Had the deepest sleep in a long time last night. Dan's smile is great. I think it's beautiful. I mean, that's just who he is. It's an authentic smile. It's not a put on, pretend, or a forced smile. So he ran a New York City marathon, 3 hours and 28 minutes. So Steve Saylor notes physiognomy and exercise often reflect a person's political predisposition. So you expect long distance runners to be more on the left, and you expect weightlifters to be more on the right. So I don't spit out 1% as many head-snapping insights as Richard Spencer. Right? It's just that I optimize for telling the truth, and Richard Spencer optimizes for capturing attention. Richard Spencer endorsed Kamala Harris, endorsed Joe Biden, and they both proved to be disasters. And Donald Trump was a pretty darn good president. Richard Spencer said Elon Musk was a con man. And on what basis did he make that statement? He'd watched some YouTube videos. Elon Musk. Richard Spencer said that Elon Musk buying Twitter wouldn't change Twitter. Right, so when you optimize for attention getting, that comes at the price of truth. When you optimize for a partisan agenda, that comes at the price of truth. And so the track record of this show is really good. Not necessarily in terms of predictions, but just noticing reality. When Elon Musk was looking to take over Twitter, it was obvious to any fair-minded observer that there were going to be significant changes in the platform Twitter. Right? For the first time, we had a black and the blue wall of social media. And then it had repercussions throughout the rest of social media. So Facebook and YouTube could not censor as much, and the mainstream media wouldn't have as much of a stranglehold on information when you had free-flowing discussion on X. It was incredibly significant, but it was obvious And so for those pundits who optimize for attention seeking, stating the obvious is boring. And if you severely punish violent criminals, you will have significantly less violent crime. So for all those pundits like Richard Spencer say, what do Republicans stand for? They don't stand for anything. Right? Republicans, far more than Democrats, stand for capital punishment for murder and much more severe penalties for people who commit violent crime. It's an obvious commonsensical point, and it's just boring to those who are optimizing for excitement and attention seeking. But it's incredibly important for quality of life and for just keeping people alive. Right? If we had a national agenda with politicians and law enforcement supported by the news media and big business, that Black Lives Matter was a terrorist organization that would unleash massive amounts of chaos, that the most vulnerable communities would pay the heaviest price, right? We would have 100,000 more living Americans now. But because the news media, the elites, were successful in promoting Black Lives Matter, the terrorist organization, we've had a massive increase in crime, destruction in the quality of life in America, massive increase in bad behavior because police have been disincentivized from doing their jobs. So we had a surge in murder, surge in pedestrian deaths, surge in driving deaths, right? Because one side of the political spectrum, the Democratic Party, along with its compatriots in the news media and big institutions, sided and promoted with a terrorist organization, Black Lives Matter. And they wreaked havoc on American life. It turns out that Joe Biden was not the start of something. He was just an intermission. That we're living in the Trump era. And Joe Biden was an unfortunate intermission in the Trump era. And remember before Donald Trump was charged with a felony, remember when Donald Trump announced his re-election bid after the midterm elections? There was very little excitement and interest in Donald Trump. Right? The excitement and interest in Trump boomed once the Democrats went after him in New York and in Florida and Washington, D.C. and Georgia and launched massive amounts of warfare. I think the classified documents case, that was the best case out of the four. You can make the strongest case that was a legitimate prosecution. I'm not saying it was, I'm saying that out of the four, that was the strongest. But that's when Donald Trump roared back into relevance in American life. And so the harder the Democrats worked to keep him off the ballot, to shut him down, the stronger Trump got. Like Trump thrived on opposition. And I think that's often true. Right? The more you fight something, often the stronger that thing gets. And rather than making a case for why your party and your politicians have the best plans for improving the quality of life for regular Americans, right? The focus on calling Donald Trump names and trying to ban him from the ballot, practicing lawfare against him, and the uniform nature of news media coverage just falling in line with Democratic talking points just made Donald Trump stronger. The more they tried to put him down, right, the taller he stood. And it's hilarious that Joe Biden, who just squeaked into office in 2020, right, if 50,000 votes had gone the other way, Biden would have lost. And then he listened to historian and journalist John Meacham that he had the opportunity to become more significant than Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So Joe Biden did not try to govern as someone who just barely squeaked into office. He campaigned as a centrist, just like Keir Starmer in Britain, the Labour Party Prime Minister, campaigned as a centrist, but now is operating as a leftist. Joe Biden campaigned as a centrist and a moderate, and he governed like a leftist. He massively overreached, and now there's blowback. And he bought into the BS that John Meacham was telling him. And now it's not that Biden was gullible, right? It's not that John Meacham manipulated him into doing something that he didn't want to do. It's that John Meacham opened up a door that Joe Biden wanted to walk down. And so Joe Biden has always had a grandiose assessment of his own abilities. And the brutal fact is that Joe Biden is a mediocre man who, by luck of the draw, lived in Delaware, a tiny state where it was relatively easy for him to get elected to the US Senate. Joe Biden is not a man with any outstanding abilities, just like Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is just a massive nothing. There's nothing extraordinary about her. She seems nice enough. She's got a nice smile and a nice figure. But she has no extraordinary accomplishments. She's not good at running things. She's not good at managing people. She's not good at speaking off the cuff. She's not good at making decisions. She lacks courage. She's not really good at anything. It's a massive nullity, like a big empty nothing. And it was just hilarious that Democrats ran on the platform democracy is on the ballot, but they're initially trying to run a senile Joe Biden, who was obviously senile since 2017, and that was just massively covered up by the news media. And then they just installed Kamala Harris. And why did they install Kamala Harris? Because she was a black woman. All right? They felt like they couldn't say no to Kamala Harris, that to have an open primary, some kind of open contest for the Democratic nomination would be too upsetting to the black female constituency of the Democratic Party. And so Democrats were imprisoned by their own identity politics, that they couldn't have an open competition. Right? They had to rig it. They had to practice affirmative action. And simply because Kamala Harris is black and female, that's why she was Joe Biden's vice president, not because she had any particular strengths. And then she got the presidential nomination simply because she was a black woman, and Democrats couldn't face having an open competition that might upset the black constituency of the Democratic Party, who were never enthused for Kamala Harris in the first place, because Kamala Harris doesn't have much in common with the black experience in America. She's about 1/4 black, right? She's half Brahmin Indian. She's 1/4 white, right? She could pass, just like Barack Obama could pass. Barack Obama didn't realize he was black, or didn't choose to make that his primary identity until he saw it as a good path forward when he got to Harvard Law School. Advantages in working identity politics. I love that Susie Wild. I had a hard time going to sleep last night, so I'm running off very little sleep the last few days. And I lay down last night because it seemed to take so long for Donald Trump to speak. I just had Fox News playing just the sound on my phone, see if I could drift off to sleep. And then they played that Lee Greenwood song, God Bless America, God Bless the USA. I got up, turned on the TV screen. I just wanted to see Trump's announcement. It was quite low key. It was quite understated. It was pretty similar, wasn't it? Pretty similar in tone to his 2016 announcement, victory speech. I love that Susie Wiles, who ran Donald Trump's campaign, would not speak. Right? She didn't want any time in the spotlight. So you can get so much done when people aren't eager to hog the credit and hog attention. Susie Wiles, right, the one who ran the most disciplined, effective campaign that Donald Trump has ever run. She wanted no attention. She didn't want to speak. Trump kind of forced Chris LaCivita, her lieutenant, to speak. But Trump was gracious last night. He didn't mention Kamala Harris. That was brilliant, right? Because she doesn't matter. And what bad form was it for her that she never called, right? Normally, a victory speech begins with, I just spoke to my opponent who conceded the race, and I congratulated him on her on a hard-fought campaign. But Kamala Harris hasn't even conceded. She didn't even make a concession call to Donald Trump. I thought the Democrats were going to show us, how to honorably accept defeat. I mean, what bad form that was for the Democrats and for Kamala Harris. She didn't even call to congratulate Donald Trump yet. Though it's been obvious that she was going to lose since... Well, when did Fox News call the race? Fox News called the race about 11 p.m. on the West Coast? The Fox News called the race. So I watched Trump's victory speech. It was good. It was like it helped me go to sleep. It was just what I would have wanted. So it said all the right things. Okay, let's have a look at the chat. Richard Spencer is reeling. Yeah, AI is a source of entertainment. No killer app has been identified. Can you speak more on the friend-enemy distinction? Okay, so this is a Carl Schmitt concept, that the essence of politics is the friend-enemy distinction. So it's an epigraph. It's a compelling little phrase that is not meant to be definitive. So in some situations, right, the essence of the political is the friend-enemy distinction, right? When you are fighting for your life, in that type of politics, when politics is deadly serious, where your life is at risk because of an enemy who has risen into view, then that is politics. That is the essence of politics. Nothing else matters as much. And that is never applied in American politics, right? The other party has never been such an enemy that they threaten the lives of the members of the opposing party. But in some political situations, such as in Israel's wars, where Israel's fighting for survival, any people that's fighting for survival, fighting for its life, then it will naturally divide the world into friend and enemy. So Steve Sailer does not care for the continental philosophers, but I'm quite a devotee of Carl Schmitt. I find many useful insights. And so that's a useful insight in certain situations. Right? It doesn't really apply to American politics, because if Kamala Harris were elected, the lives of Republicans would not be at risk. Donald Trump is elected, the lives of Democrats are not at risk. Chuck Johnson is looking a bit silly right now. Okay, chat says that Donald Trump is a criminal. He is, right? He was convicted of many felonies. He deserves to be behind bars. You can make a case for that. And I understand that point of view. I don't think it's ridiculous. But all the criminal cases against him are going away. Were trans issues the pivotal issue? They were really important. I mean, that seemed like the number one issue that Republicans were running TV ads on. The idea that Kamala Harris supported taxpayer-funded sexual transition surgeries It strikes any normal person as absolutely insane. And John Podhoretz made a great case yesterday morning in his podcast that transforming what it means to be human is what the election's all about. Democrats wanted to completely transform what we understand to be human, male-female differences. And Republicans don't want to transform the meaning of being human. Biden beat Donald Trump by 7 million votes. Yeah, I believe he did. So if you simply think that the Donald Trump movement is a cult, there are many ways that's true, right? Any in-group identity has many of the characteristics of cult identity, right? Name me any strong in-group identity that does not have most of the characteristics of cult identity. You can't. So anytime you have a strong in-group identity, it will have many of the characteristics of a cult identity. So that's true for Republicans and for Democrats, for Trump supporters and for Kamala supporters. Your cult leader is not any good at managing people. He's not good at speaking off the cuff, nor making good decisions. I agree with you that Donald Trump does not have a great record at running things. Now, he can be hilarious speaking off the cuff, and he can transmit some blunt truths, but he's not my favorite spokesman for what I believe in. I'm not some massive Donald Trump partisan, right? I was not mourning that in January 2021, it looked like he was done in American politics. Have the Senate seats been decided? Not yet. But it appears that Republicans are on track for anywhere from 53 to 55 Senate seats. Yeah, I think Donald Trump is worthy of criticism, and much of it is appropriate, but the whole white supremacist, authoritarian, cult leader, fascist, Nazi, I think that's a little over the top. Donald Trump should pay for his crimes. Well, he has, man. Can you believe the massive amount of humiliation and inconvenience and just the excruciating prosecutions and investigations that he's been through? Donald Trump has paid for his crimes. Now, you can argue he's not paid sufficiently for his crimes, but with all the humiliation and excruciating investigations and court cases that he's been through, I'd say he's paid plenty. And he is substantially responsible for these prosecutions. If he hadn't behaved so badly, right, he would not be the recipient of all this lawfare. Right, Democrats don't try to prosecute Republicans the same way that they went after Donald Trump. Right, this is not just something that Democrats do to Republican leaders. This is something unique to Donald Trump. And like Richard Nixon, Donald Trump gave his enemies a sword. Unlike Richard Nixon, Donald Trump managed to keep about 20% of the elite on his side. It's impossible to get anything done if you've got 95% of the elite aligned against you, which is what Richard Nixon faced in his last year in office. Donald Trump was always able to keep about 20% of the elite on his side. False. A group having strong identity is a cult. Okay, name me a strong in-group identity that does not have many cult-like characteristics. Humiliation. WTF. That's not paying for your crimes. Right, very few people would have been able to go through what Donald Trump has gone through and not broken down. Right, he has suffered the loss of hundreds of millions of dollars due to his political stances, to his political behavior. Many of those losses are well deserved. But the idea that there's only one way you can pay for your crimes, and that is to be put behind prison. Not even the criminal justice system operates that way. Right? That's not the only penalty for committing crimes. It's time behind bars. Right? Public humiliation, inconvenience, being forced to show up to a court at certain times and places, being pulled off the campaign trail, having to listen to excruciating testimony about your sexual affair with Stormy Daniels while your wife was either pregnant or just recovering from giving birth to your son. How many people would be able to brazen that out? So many people would have much preferred time behind bars, that kind of public humiliation. My God, Twitter is so much fun these days. It's so entertaining. Interesting that Trump's white support has dropped each of the last 2 elections. So Donald Trump won and ran on the anti-Steve Saylor strategy. The Saylor strategy was the best way for Republicans to get elected, is to go where the votes are, that is among white voters. And Donald Trump lost support among white voters, massively gained among Latino voters, because Latino is an exceedingly weak identity. It's pretty much a meaningless identity, right? People may identify as Mexican American or Brazilian American, but Latino or Latinx is not some super important identity. So as Americans, Latinos wanted tough on crime, wanted to control immigration, wanted to improve the quality of life in America. So you might say, Luke, you seduced this woman, and if I were to become engaged to her and marry her, wouldn't it be then hypocritical of you to not want other men to have sex with her? No, I don't think it is hypocritical. So once Latinos come to America and make America their home, it's not hypocritical that they want to control immigration so as to improve the quality of life. They don't want other people coming over and effing America. They want America for American citizens. Now, I remember following the news. By a year ago, it was clear to a lot of foreign leaders that Donald Trump was likely to return to the White House. So Europe and Japan and China and Russia have been prepared for a year that Donald Trump is likely returning to the White House. So often people across the seas can see things more clearly than Americans can. So Biden was just an intermission, and his legacy is not so good. And think about how important Elon Musk was to open up free speech and to throw his support and his money behind Donald Trump. And this was overwhelmingly an election against our institutions, against the direction of the country, and a revolt of the people against the elites. It was very much a populist revolt. The elites were wrong, right? Donald Trump won a crushing, decisive victory against their expectations. And I remember talking to some elites in 2016 about how Donald Trump was going to win. And for a year prior to Trump's victory, they would say things to me like, I know things that you don't know. And that's why I know that Donald Trump is not going to win the Republican nomination or the presidency. Right? And this smug, superior, I know things that you don't know. It's amusing. So remember all the confident political operatives and pollsters and pundits who have proclaimed for the past few months that there's no way that the polls will underpoll Donald Trump 3 elections in a row. That's never happened before. Well, it happened again this time. Right? The polls consistently underpolled Donald Trump by 2 points. And this is primarily true for the public polls. Right? This is the public versus private polling distinction that Mark Halperin makes, which is so valuable, which I found incredibly insightful. I'm not sure I was fully aware of it. Right? Public polls are done on the cheap. They're done with much less effort and rigor, and they are much less accurate, and they are much more likely to be deceiving. And so private polls have indicated for months that Donald Trump was ahead in the key Rust Belt states and the Sun Belt states. Right? The private polls for both Democrats and Republicans, right? These are much more rigorous. They are much more expensive. These are polls commissioned by the campaigns where they spend the money to get things right. And while we had all sorts of movement in the public polls, right, the private polls got this election right. And that's where Halperin was so valuable, that he would share with us, what the private polls were saying. So if you spend 10 times as much money and put 10 times as much care and dedication and effort and work into trying to get an accurate poll, right, it's more likely to be accurate than the poll done on the cheap. And so this election is also a vindication of the power of private polls over public polls. And the private polls had this election nailed for months, for a year. The private polls showed that Donald Trump was in a position to win all the battleground states, that Donald Trump was leading in all the battleground states. Right, private polls for both Republicans and Democrats have indicated that for a year. And so often you get what you pay for, right? The shoddy, low effort public polling, not nearly as accurate as the more expensive private polls. Now, it seemed as we got closer to election day, the more one-sided and hysterical and unfair and distorting the news media was. And it turned out that voters and Latinos and Puerto Ricans didn't really care about Tony Hinchcliffe's comments or Donald Trump's comments about how chicken hawks such as Liz Cheney should have to face the consequences of being so pro-war. Would they be so pro-war if they were in the fight with guns trained on them? And the media distorted that to say that Trump was calling for Liz Cheney's execution. So the dominant stories of the final weeks of the campaign that were unfair to Donald Trump, that distorted the things he said, didn't make a difference. So this was devastating to the legacy news media. Right? They kept saying that this was a 50-50 race, right, based on public polls. But surely their reporters had sources within the campaigns who could have revealed to them what the private polls were saying. This was never going to be close. For a year, we knew that Donald Trump was on track to an electoral college landslide victory. Right? That was known by people who had access to the private polls. Yet the news media never conveyed that basic truth. But you got it on Mark Halperin's show, but you didn't get it anywhere else in the mainstream media, of which I'm aware. So a really bad job done by the news media in this campaign. And I don't think they're going to learn anything, so people will get their news more and more from alternative sources. Oh, it's hilarious. The youth vote in Nevada, the Nevada vote count is getting held up for all sorts of reasons, but one of them is that there are 14,000 youth votes where they either didn't sign their ballots or their signature doesn't match the signature on their driver's license. So I don't know about you, but my signature depends a lot on my mood and on the context of a particular situation. My signature can become much more flamboyant or much more controlled depending on circumstance. So it's hilarious. There are 14,000 youth votes in Nevada where the youth either don't know how to write their signature in cursive or there's some problem like that. Civility is a beautiful value, and truth is a beautiful value. But sometimes, in some situations, there are more important things. So Donald Trump did not put civility first, and he did not put truth first. He put his program first, and unfortunately, he often tried to put himself first. But he won the situation. And so, would I have preferred that Donald Trump had been more civil and more truthful? Yes. But he was highly effective, right? He has the art of the bullshitter down. Oh, one of the most annoying things in the reactions to this election is hearing women say, as a woman. Do you ever hear men speak that way? As a man, I just want to say. All right, let's have a look at the chat. Having any cult-like tendencies and a cult, what is wrong with your head? All right, simply ask you a very simple question. If answering a simple question is too embarrassing for you because it makes you recognize that I'm right and you're wrong, I recognize the humiliation you must feel. It must be devastating for you ASICs to see that you are just yelling a bunch of nonsense. And I asked a simple question that cuts through to your core, where you realize that you're just up on your high horse and you don't really have a clue what you're talking about. Actually, such a simple question, right? What strong in-group identity does not have many similarities to a cult? It's just a simple question, and apparently you can't answer it. It must be painful for you. Can I take calls during these walk streams? I don't think I can. Do I believe that Elon's support was motivated by his need for government contracts? I think it was a gestalt. I think it was a whole body, whole panoply of interest response that brought Elon to Donald Trump's side. Trump is the chicken hawk. Hey, Donald Trump didn't serve in combat, but he had a lot of sex during the era of AIDS, so that was his Vietnam. Trafalgar seems to have been vindicated. So much fun. Just purely a coincidence that I'm wearing my red shirt today after the election. Now, when Trump won in 2016, that was such a pleasure that I honestly felt like it was the greatest day of my life. What would compete with it would be getting on 60 Minutes. So I watched 60 Minutes a lot as a kid. So being interviewed on 60 Minutes was a high. Getting my first porn star blowjobs, like the amazing deep-throating ability of porn stars, was a mystical revelation. That was a high. I remember as a kid, I would read a lot of books, and I'd see books about, say, the 60s protests and protests at UC Berkeley, and some of the protests, there would be like a naked woman just lying on top of a crowd, and they're holding her up with their hands. And I dreamed that when I grew up, I'd get to partake in, those carnal activities. Now, they were not for my benefit, and they were not for society's benefit, but they were the selfish satisfactions of my carnal dreams. Say converting to Judaism was a high, in large part because I knew I needed to keep a lid on my lustful carnal side. But this Trump victory, I'm not sure it's in my top 10 happiest days of my life, but it is a happy day. And I feel like it's a vindication of this channel, right? The themes that I've been hitting on. Different people have different gifts. right? Different people not just see the world differently, but different people have different politics and different hero systems because they experience the world differently. The power of genes and imprinting and the relative low importance of reason compared to the power of genes and imprinting. That these foundational perspectives, how the situation will often determine the moral absolute and determine what aspect of a person we brought to the fore. The foundational principles of this channel just keep getting vindicated again and again. So they're not exciting in the way that Richard Spencer's proclamations are exciting. They just keep working. That this channel recognized back in 2018 that the alt-right was touching on themes that were of vital concern to many Americans, but that overwhelmingly participation in the alt-right was a manifestation of a self-destructive personal trajectory, which turned out to be exactly true. That all groups deserve accurate criticism, and all groups benefit from accurate criticism. And so to be woke is to say that there are certain groups, such as blacks and gays, who should be exempt from public criticism. And that's really bad for those groups, and it's really bad for society. And this election, in part, is a repudiation of the woke agenda. Recognizing that I am improved by accurate criticism, that Jews and blacks and gays and Christians and Latinos and every group is improved by accurate criticism. Donald Trump is improved by accurate criticism. And that perspective is again vindicated by this election, in that the woke agenda wants to deny those benefits to our society. Recognition that men and women have different gifts, different proclivities. That there's daddy politics, which is much more about standards and defense. And there's a mummy politics, which is much more about nurturing and social welfare spending. And this was a triumph of daddy politics. And while Richard Hanania says the media is good and true, and I would say, in what areas, right? There are some things that the media consistently gets right, and there are a lot of things, such as with regard to Donald Trump and his movement, that the news media consistently gets wrong. The news media is populated by people who, by a ratio of about 20 to 1, 25 to 1, loathe Donald Trump and his supporters. And the media was blind to the reality of what was happening in America, and they've discredited themselves, which is why many people turn to live streams like this and to social media such as X, where you can have more free and honest discussion. That civility and the careful critical discourse of the highly educated has many benefits, but it's also incredibly stilted. It predisposes people towards avoiding blunt truths, such as Joe Biden is senile, Kamala Harris is a nullity. There's nothing impressive about her. That she gives off the vibe often of being intoxicated, having a drinking problem, and her devastating level of insecurity just shines through in every step that she takes that is not rehearsed. So because the situation is so important for understanding why the world works the way it does, it was easy for me to see after the June 27 disastrous debate that Joe Biden could not stay on top of the Democratic ticket. Now, I erred in thinking that the Democrats could not afford to just unilaterally appoint Kamala Harris. And I was right, they could not afford to do that if they wanted to win. I don't think there were many situations where Kamala Harris could possibly have won this election. She was just such an unimpressive candidate. And so if the Democrats were going to have a chance, they would have had to have nominated someone such as Josh Shapiro. So the things I say are not usually exciting. They're not going to strike you like lightning bolts from the gods but they tend to reveal the world around us often much more clearly and effectively than the New York Times, and much more clearly and effectively than right-wing talking points in right-wing talk radio and on Fox News. Much of the right-wing news media is moronic. Many of the talking points of the leading right-wing talk radio heads are low IQ. And so I try to fill a space where we get a higher IQ right-wing perspective on the world around us. Am I trapped in my own narrative frame? I certainly am. Oh, MSNBC was so removed from reality. Mark Halperin would play bits from MSNBC, and they just didn't get the election at all. Right? Their discussion was just so far removed from reality. Yes, anyone can see and hear Trump's BS. You're absolutely right, ASICS. Trump is a bullshitter. He absolutely is. He is a showman, and he has many of the qualities of the con man. But that's not all he is, right? You could look at me and you could see some of my least attractive qualities, and you could reduce me to my least attractive qualities. You could say, he's an attention seeker. He's careless. He lacks conscientiousness. He's inconsiderate. He's inconsiderate of himself. He's inconsiderate of others. He has misplaced priorities, right? You can make all sorts of devastating critiques and criticisms of me that would be either 100% accurate or very close to it, but that's not all I am, right? In addition to all my devastating weaknesses, I also have strengths. And Donald Trump is absolutely a bullshitter. He's absolutely a con man. He's absolutely childish. He absolutely has ADHD. That at least half of the common criticisms about Donald Trump are highly accurate. But that's not all he is. He also has strengths. And not many people could go through what he's gone through and emerge victorious. So just because someone's a liar, or just because someone's a cheat, just because someone's a philanderer, just because someone has often behaved like a con man, that's not all he is, right? People aren't just a liar or a philanderer, right? That's just one aspect of their personality. You have to weigh up people's strengths and weaknesses. And Donald Trump BS'd us into buying his plans. Right? As long as people on the left want to believe that Donald Trump's simply winning by demagoguery, right? There's no hope for the left to regain dominance, because you are distorting reality. People did not evolve to be gullible. Donald Trump's appeal is 100% on substance. That he delivers this message of substance, of immigration enforcement, reorienting American trade policy towards the interests of American workers, to avoiding forever wars, that he markets his substantial agenda using con man tactics and BS is true. But his appeal is 100% on substance, and as long as the crowd at MSNBC and in the elite media deny that Donald Trump's appeal is 100% on substance, right, it's just a denial of reality. And when you go to war with reality, reality always wins. When you try to put a hold on reality to pursue your delusion, reality always wins. You think that reality's laws, such as laws of gravity, laws of physics, can be put on hold or ended or superseded, right? It's not going to work out. So as long as you remain in a world-preferred delusion because it's comforting rather than reality, which is bracing and uncomfortable, you're never going to grow. And you're not going to make much progress in life. And you're going to be miserable. And you're going to live in a bubble. And you're going to face humiliation after humiliation. Right? How do you know when you're living in reality that you're not constantly running into humiliation? If you're constantly feeling humiliated, by life, and the mainstream media should absolutely feel humiliated right now, right? Because they've been denying reality. The private polls have made it clear for a year that Donald Trump was overwhelmingly going to win this election. Yeah, Morning Joe is just deluded, just fixated on Donald Trump as a fascist, right? Trump has many weaknesses, but fascism is not among them. People on Facebook are blocking out their profile pictures to resist. Bitcoin at record highs. Pray for his mental health. Yeah, we're seeing a massive mental health crisis on the left. And it will remain a crisis as long as people choose to live in delusion simply because it's more comfortable than living in the more bracing cold shower of reality. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.